It began on a rainy Thursday, March 4th, 1982. The kind of day when the streets of Ashford looked like blurred ribbons of gray through a fogged windshield, when no one would remember two men walking into a small-town bank, because everyone was too busy avoiding puddles. The bank's name was Westland Savings and Trust, a modest two-story building with cream-colored walls, a ticking clock behind the teller desks, and a faint smell of paper and disinfectant. At exactly 10:03 a.m., two men entered wearing dark raincoats, baseball caps, and cheap rubber masks that distorted their faces into eerie, inhuman shapes. Within 6 minutes, they had emptied the vault of exactly $7,042,320 in cash and vanished without a trace. Witnesses remembered little, except for the sound of one robber's voice, calm, with a southern drawl, and the way he had said, "Nobody move, nobody dies." That's the deal. The Ashford police arrived 10 minutes later. By then, the men were gone. The alarm had been triggered too late, and all that was left were a few torn money straps and a lingering smell of gasoline. The lead detective assigned to the case was Frank Keller, a 47-year-old veteran of the department, nearing retirement. He had seen his share of robberies, but never one this clean. There are no fingerprints, no fibers, no getaway witnesses. "Like ghosts," he muttered, flipping through the security photos that showed nothing but silhouettes. His partner, a young recruit named Peter Lang, was less resigned. "Ghosts leave shadows," Lang said. "We just have to find where the light hits." Over the next week, the entire town of Ashford became a hive of speculation. Locals whispered that it had to be an inside job. Others claimed they saw a black sedan heading toward the river minutes after the alarm went off. Reporters flooded the small police department. "Was it professional?" one shouted during the press conference. Keller only answered, "Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Archive. Local newspaper clipping, March 5th, 1982, Ashford's biggest heist. Over $7 million stolen, police baffled. The first major clue appeared 2 days later, when a county worker found a burned-out vehicle near the edge of the Pine Brook Forest, 6 miles from town. The VIN matched a stolen Chevrolet Impala from Chicago, reported missing 2 months earlier. Inside, forensic techs recovered fragments of a duffel bag zipper and a single charred photograph. A blurred image of 3 men in army fatigues, smiling beside a sign that read Fort Brenton, 1975. The faces were too damaged to identify. Keller stared at that picture for a long time. "They were soldiers," he said finally. "They planned this like an operation." Transcript, Detective Keller interview, 1982. "We didn't know who they were yet, but they weren't amateurs. They moved with precision. Even the timing of the traffic lights matched their route. Somebody studied this town for weeks, maybe months. The FBI got involved by March 10th. Their profiler, Agent Russell Dyer, suggested the robbers might have military or law enforcement backgrounds based on the tactics, the use of smoke grenades, the synchronized timing, the clean getaway. But without physical evidence, it was speculation. The money trail went cold. The stolen bills, most of them unmarked, never resurfaced. A partial serial number match turned up once in Nevada, but the lead evaporated. By summer, the case file had thickened to several hundred pages, and still, Keller found himself staring at that photograph almost every night. He believed the clue was there, hidden in plain sight. Meanwhile, Ashford began to forget. The bank rebuilt, the employees returned to work, and life resumed its steady rhythm. But every so often, someone would mention the ghosts, and for a brief moment, the town would remember. 10 years later, those ghosts came back. But back in 1982, the story was far from over. In late August, a fisherman named Clyde Mercer discovered something tangled in the reeds near the Ashford River, a waterproof canvas bag. Inside were damp bills, bound in Westland Savings and Trust straps. The bag contained just over $12,000, barely a fraction of the stolen millions, but enough to reopen the conversation. "They ditched part of it here," Lang said, standing by the riverbank under the flash of cameras. "Maybe more downstream." The search expanded. Divers combed the muddy water. Volunteers sifted through debris, but nothing else surfaced. Then came a letter. It arrived at the police station on September 1st, 1982, addressed simply to Detective Keller. The envelope was cheap, unmarked, and postmarked from Cedar Falls, 2 towns over. Inside, a single sheet of paper with typed text. "You're looking in the wrong place." The river didn't take it. I did. No signature, just a faint coffee ring in the corner. Archive. Letter reproduction. Case file 82 to 317, page 204. The envelope had no fingerprints. Forensics confirmed it was typed on an Olympia SM9, a model popular in the mid-70s, but rare by the 80s. Keller held the note in his hand for a long time before saying, quietly, "He's watching us." The letter marked the beginning of a strange pattern. Every few months, another envelope arrived. Each one included a vague line hinting at guilt or pride, written in the same mechanical type. "Sometimes I dream of the vault. The money's not where you think. It's cleaner underground." The press nicknamed the writer the Ashford Ghost. Keller suspected one of the robbers had turned on the other, or was taunting them from afar. But there was no way to trace the letters. Years passed. Keller retired in 1987, the case unsolved. Lang moved to the State Bureau. The story faded into legend. Until, in 1992, a construction crew digging a new highway found a rusted lockbox buried near the old Pinebrook site. Inside, cash bundles wrapped in deteriorated plastic, totaling roughly $30,000, and an envelope with a photograph. The same 3 men in fatigues, but this time their faces were intact. One of them was unmistakably a young Frank Keller, smiling beside 2 soldiers identified later as William Bill Harker and Raymond Cole. Keller never mentioned he served at Fort Brennan. When confronted years later, he only said, "Those men saved my life once." Archive audio. 1992 police press briefing reporter. Detective Keller, "Were you acquainted with the suspects?" Keller, "They were comrades." "What happened after the war?" "I can't answer for that." Reporter, "Did you help them?" Keller, pause. "I didn't help anyone. I just didn't stop them soon enough." The revelation stunned Ashford. The retired detective who had led the original investigation was connected to the very men suspected of the heist. But by then, Keller was ill, living quietly near the coast. Lang was brought back in as a consultant, and the FBI reopened the case. What they discovered over the following months would rewrite everything the town thought it knew about the Westland robbery. But before that second chapter began, another envelope arrived, postmarked from the same town as the first, 10 years apart. It contained no words this time, only a small, folded check. The payee line read, "Westland Savings and Trust." The amount, $7,042,320. The signature, R. Cole. The check was dated March 4th, 1982, the same day as the robbery. And that's where part 1 ends, because what happened next wasn't just a crime story. It was a confession written across time. If you want to know what they found next, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. 10 years had passed, but when the envelope arrived, it was as if 1982 had never ended. The paper was yellowed, but the ink was dark, clean, deliberate. Peter Lang stared at the check for a long time inside the evidence room. He ran his thumb over the signature, R. Cole, and felt a tremor crawl up his spine. Raymond Cole, the name that hadn't appeared in any police database in a decade. Cole, the quiet one, the demolitions expert back in Fort Brennan, the man Keller once called steady under fire. If he was alive, he was taunting them. If he was dead, someone else was writing for him. Either way, it meant the ghost had come back to Ashford. The case was reopened under the Bureau's Cold Case Division. Lang, now 42, was appointed as special consultant. He hadn't been back to Ashford in years, but when he drove down the old road leading to the town, it was as though the fog had never lifted. Westland Savings and Trust stood there, newly renovated, all glass and steel, with no trace of the past except for a small brass plaque near the door, in memory of those who kept faith. Lang parked, lit a cigarette, and stared at the plaque. He thought about Keller, the man who had taught him everything about patience, about silence, about how sometimes the truth hid in the noise. Keller had died in 1989 of heart failure, just 3 years after retiring. His death certificate listed natural causes. But Lang couldn't shake the feeling that Keller had taken something with him, something the rest of them had never found. Archive recording, local news segment, 1992. Authorities have reopened the infamous 1982 Ashford bank robbery after a mysterious check surfaced bearing the signature of one of the alleged perpetrators. The FBI believes this could be linked to new evidence found near Pine Brook Forest earlier this year. Lang was given a small team, 2 federal agents, a forensic accountant, and a digital analyst named Amy Kearns. The first task was to authenticate the check. The ink and paper dated accurately to 1982. The bank account it referenced was real, but closed days after the robbery. It belonged to a company called RC Logistics, registered under a post office box in Illinois. The address traced back to an empty lot. The accountant, a sharp man named Barnes, found something else. The account was linked to another shell company, he said. Harker Freight Lines. Opened 1980. Closed 1982. Guess who the signatory was? Lang already knew the name before Barnes said it. William Harker, the second man in the photo. 2 names. One dead, one missing. And a retired detective who had once been their commanding officer. The triangle was closing. Transcript. FBI internal memo, June 1992. It is plausible that Keller recognized his former platoon members as the suspects in the robbery, but withheld that information to avoid exposure or to buy them time. Whether he aided them remains uncertain. Recommend re-examination of all evidence collected from 1982 to locate any sign of internal suppression or document tampering. Lang returned to Keller's old house the next morning. It was a modest coastal cottage, still standing at the edge of town. The new owner, a retired nurse, agreed to let him look through the old shed where Keller had kept his case files. Among the boxes of fishing gear and old uniforms, Lang found a cardboard box labeled Ashford, personal notes. Inside were notebooks, faded photographs, and a single cassette tape wrapped in a napkin. The label read simply, March 3rd, 1982, the day before the robbery. Transcript, Keller tape number 3, Keller, voice tired, reflective, he called again today. Said he needed one last favor. I told him that chapter was closed. He said it never really was. I don't know what he's planning, but he sounded desperate. If I don't write again, it's because I couldn't stop it. The tape ended there. The silence that followed felt heavier than the words. Lang played it 3 times. The voice on the other end was not recorded, but Keller's tone carried something rare, fear. The next step was tracing Raymond Cole. Records showed he was discharged from the Army in 1976 for disciplinary reasons. After that, he worked odd jobs across Illinois, Kansas, and Missouri. Then, in 1981, he vanished. His last known address was a trailer outside Joliet. Lang and Kearns visited the area, now an overgrown field. The neighbor, an elderly man named Don Vickers, remembered him. Yeah, Ray Vickers said, quiet fella, used to sit on his porch with a shortwave radio, always looking west, like he was waiting for something. Then one night, gone. Didn't even pack his stuff. Lang walked through the remains of the trailer's foundation. In the debris, he noticed something half buried, a rusted metal box. Inside, wrapped in an oily rag, was an old photo strip, 3 shots from a bus terminal photo booth. Keller, Harker, and Cole. In the last frame, Keller was holding up a handwritten note. For later, the edges of the strip were smeared with what looked like dried mud. Forensics later confirmed traces of red clay, unique to the Pine Brook area. Lang drove back to Ashford in silence. The implications were suffocating. Keller had known. Maybe he tried to stop them and failed. Maybe he helped them. Either way, his conscience had buried itself deeper than the money ever had. By late July, the investigation reached another wall. Harker had died in a car accident in Texas in 1988, unidentified until now due to a false ID. Cole remained missing. Lang began rereading Keller's notebooks, page after page of half-coded notes. March 2nd, phone call. March 3rd, decision made. March 4th, operation at 10 o'clock. March 5th, gone. One note stood out. If they go through with it, the vault key isn't where they think. Lang turned the page. The next line read, Safety deposit number 317. Westland Savings had long replaced all their old deposit boxes, but the archive still existed in storage. Box 317 had been opened and cleared in 1982 by a name that froze Lang's blood: Frank Keller. He requested access to the archived box record. Inside, they found a single folded map. It was a blueprint of the bank's underground wiring and ventilation system, with a route marked in red leading to a maintenance tunnel that connected to a storm drain 2 blocks away. The red line ended at a small X near the old railway yard. Lang drove there the next day. The yard was fenced off, the tracks rusted, the warehouses abandoned. He walked for nearly an hour before finding the storm drain grate, half covered by weeds. Beneath it, darkness. He descended with a flashlight. The air was damp, thick with the smell of rust and mold. After 20 yards, the tunnel widened into a small chamber where the brickwork had been disturbed. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. Lang dug with his hands until he uncovered a cylindrical container about the size of a thermos. Inside, he found a roll of film sealed in wax paper and a single Polaroid. The photo showed Keller standing beside a stack of duffel bags, money bags, inside what looked like that very chamber. On the back, in fading ink, were the words, "They made me take it. I had to hide it." Lang exhaled it slowly. His mentor had been both the investigator and the accomplice. The ghosts weren't only the robbers, they were his own. Archive memo, FBI internal, August 1992. Evidence suggests Keller may have retrieved a portion of the stolen funds following the robbery, possibly under duress. The extent of his involvement remains unclear. Recommend excavation of tunnel site. The excavation began 2 weeks later. Under the soil, agents uncovered 4 sealed military containers. Each held cash, rotting, waterlogged, but traceable. Rough estimate, $1.4 million. The serial numbers matched the missing currency from Westland. But alongside the containers, they found bones. Human remains, 2 sets, later identified as William Harker and an unidentified male consistent with Raymond Cole's profile. Each had a bullet wound to the skull. The case that began as a robbery had become a burial. Lang stood over the open trench as forensic lights flickered in the dark. "So they killed each other," Kearns whispered. "Or someone killed both," Lang replied. The autopsy reports revealed a chilling pattern. The bullets came from the same gun, a .38 revolver registered to none other than Frank Keller. The chain of betrayal was complete. Transcript, Keller's personal notebook, last entry. "I never wanted it to end this way. Bill thought Ray was going to talk. Ray thought Bill was going to run. They both wanted out. I buried them because no one else would. I thought I could make it right. But the weight doesn't leave." Lang closed the notebook. For the first time, he felt not anger but sorrow. Keller had carried his guilt for a decade, haunted by the men he once commanded, bound by the silence of brotherhood. The money had never really been about greed. It was about survival, about paying off debts no one else could understand. In September, the Bureau held a press conference. The official statement read, "After 10 years, the Ashford case has been resolved. Evidence indicates the perpetrators were former servicemen. The majority of stolen funds have been recovered. The lead investigator, Frank Keller, is posthumously cleared of active conspiracy but remains central to the concealment phase. The motive remains undetermined." But Lang knew the motive. It was loyalty twisted into fear. That night, he returned to the tunnel one last time. The chamber was empty now, the evidence removed, the ground leveled. He sat on the damp floor and turned on his flashlight. On the wall, faint but visible under the light, were words scratched into the brick: "Forgive us." He didn't know if Keller wrote it or Cole. Maybe both. The town of Ashford moved on again. The legend of the $7 million faded into documentaries and trivia, a line in history books. But Lang couldn't stop thinking about the check. When the Bureau tested it again, they found microscopic traces of modern ink, barely visible under infrared light. It had been tampered with recently. Someone had re-inked the signature. The case, it seemed, was never truly closed. Months later, Lang received a call from Kearns. "You need to see this," she said. She'd been reviewing Keller's old phone logs. One number, repeated dozens of times, belonged not to Cole or Harker, but to a post office in Cedar Falls, the same town for which the letters were mailed. They tracked the box rental history and found it was still active. The current renter was a Robert Callan, age 63, a retired mechanic. Lang and Kearns drove out there. The postmaster confirmed Callan came every Friday morning to check his mail. That Friday, they waited in an unmarked car. At 9:15, a man in a gray jacket arrived, moving slowly but steadily. He signed for a letter and slipped it into his pocket. Lang apoa chet. Mr. Callan? The man turned. The face was older, gaunt but unmistakable. Raymond Cole. For a moment, both men stood in silence. Then Cole smiled faintly. Took you long enough. They arrested him without resistance. At the field office, Cole refused a lawyer. He asked for coffee and a cigarette, then leaned back in the chair. Bill wanted out, he said. Frank couldn't let him. Said it'd destroy everything. He didn't mean to kill him. Neither did I. But it went bad. Money changes people, even the good ones. And the letters? Lang asked. Reminders, Cole said. Some things don't stay buried. Cole led them to a final location, a farmhouse 30 miles from Ashford. Beneath the floorboards, they found a last duffel bag, $800,000 in deteriorated bills, and an envelope addressed to Lang. Inside, a note written in shaky handwriting. You did what I couldn't. Let them rest. Cole died of heart failure a month later while awaiting trial. The Bureau closed the case permanently in December 1992. The total recovered, $2.2 million. The rest, they believed, had been burned or lost. For Lang, it didn't matter anymore. The real currency had always been time, and too much of it had been spent chasing ghosts. Archive record, final press release, December 1992. The Ashford robbery is officially concluded. The events serve as a reminder of the human cost behind crime, loyalty, and silence. Lang left law enforcement the following year. He opened a small private investigation firm, specializing in cold cases. Sometimes he received letters with no return address, typed on the same Olympia machine. They always contained a single line. The last one read, "It's cleaner underground." He never told anyone about them. Years later, the Westland Vault was decommissioned and turned into a historical exhibit. Visitors could see a replica of the old security footage, the faded check, the typewritten notes. There was even a recording of Lang recounting the case in a documentary. His voice, older, distant, ended with a simple reflection. It wasn't just about the money. It was about men trying to bury their past, and the past refusing to stay buried. In 2002, 20 years after the robbery, a groundskeeper found a single gold-plated dog tag near the Pinebrook site. The name engraved, R. Cole. It now rests in the Ashford Historical Museum, next to the words scratched into the brick wall, preserved under glass. Forgive us. The town remains quiet. The river still moves the same way it did in 1982, slow and indifferent. But if you stand by the water long enough, some say you can still hear the faint click of a camera shutter or the whisper of a man saying, "Nobody move, nobody dies." Perhaps memory is its own crime scene, one that never truly closes. What do you think? Was justice ever really served? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Disclaimer. 1. All characters, names, and locations are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. 2. Any resemblance to real persons or events is coincidental. Factual elements were verified through research on period-accurate details of law enforcement and 1980s banking protocols. Title options. 1. Ashford's Lost Millions. The 1982 Bank Heist Files. 2. Ghosts of the Westland Robbery. A Cold Case Unearthed. 3. The $7 million Silence. Crime, Loyalty, and Lies Descriptions. 1. The untold story of a 1982 bank heist that haunted a town for decades, until one letter brought the past back to life. 2. They stole $7 million and disappeared. 10 years later, the truth began to dig itself out. 3. A crime, a brotherhood, a secret buried beneath Ashford soil. What really happened in 1982? Thumbnail ideas. 1. Image. Old vault door half open, rain pouring outside. Text, $7 million. No witnesses. 2. Image, a weathered typewriter and a faded photo on an evidence table. Text, the letter that changed everything. 3. Image, dark tunnel with faint light ahead. Text, 10 years later, they found him.